Well, it's been an incredibly difficult last couple of years as a result of the global pandemic. And just when it seemed that the global economy was progressively coming out of the pandemic situation comes news of the Russian invasion of Ukraine and all that that entails. Well, joining us now to discuss some of the key global concerns in terms of the economy, what it means for billions around the world, the MD of the International Monetary Fund, Kristalina Georgieva. Thank you, ma'am, very much for being with us. Now, the IMF cut its global forecast down to 3.6%. The war in the Ukraine hasn't come down. In fact, it could stretch on. Is it your concern that the global growth forecast could come down even further?
What we are seeing since we downgraded growth is that downside risks are materializing. Financial conditions are tightening, the dollar is appreciating, and the Chinese economy is slowing down. As you said, the war continues to be a major setback factor for the global economy. So further downgrades are not out of question. What I want to stress are 2 points. One, different countries find themselves in very different positions. Why? Because some have recovered more from the pandemic-induced crisis, others less.
Right.
Some are more dependent on imports from Russia, Ukraine, others less.
Right.
And some have higher level of debt, therefore more vulnerable to tightening of financial conditions, others have less.
Right.
So when we look at the year, which is going to be a difficult year, we would likely see some economies slipping into recession, but overall, no global recession. Let's remember...
Okay, so that's some good news.
Yes, 3.6%. This is the annual average of the previous decade.
Right.
And there is a long way to go from 3.6% to minus territory for the world.
Right. Ma'am, let's talk a little bit about food insecurity as a result of the crisis again in Ukraine. That's a major concern. It drives up inflation all across the world. There is fuel inflation as well. Again, that's something that's driving up cost. Now, this affects countries around the world, particularly the developed countries. Your thoughts on how critical the situation is?
The food situation is extremely serious. Even before the war, because of climatic events, we have seen harvest dropping in many places and the risk of famine already looming in the Horn of Africa. With the withdrawal of supplies from Russia and Ukraine, both very important grain producers, the push on prices is just overwhelming. Even this last week, when slowdown in China in particular led to decline in oil prices, food prices continue to climb up. We are very concerned that this has led to export restrictions in nearly 30 countries, and we would like to see the world coming together to prevent a food crisis that can virtually kill millions of people.
Ma'am, you're talking about export restrictions. Are you disappointed at the Indian export restriction on wheat?
I do have an appreciation for the fact that India needs to feed nearly 1.35 billion people. And I do have appreciation for the heat wave that has reduced agricultural productivity in India. But I would beg India to reconsider as soon as possible, because the more countries step into export restrictions, the more others will be tempted to do so. And we would end up as global community less equipped to deal with this crisis and crisis to come in the future.
If India were to restrict export restrictions now, to end export restrictions, how much would it ease the global food insecurity situation?
Well, India is a source of wheat export, and wheat is one of the areas where Ukraine and Russia have been dramatically impacted by the war. So depending on how much India can export and where it directs its export, it could have actually significant impact, especially if exports go to the countries most severely impacted, like Egypt or Lebanon, where what we see is not only risk of hunger, this is already happening, but risk of social unrest and impact on global stability as a result.
Ma'am, the global inequality of vaccines has been a major factor which affects not just human lives but also the global economy. Do you believe that that has been addressed to a large extent now?
Where we are today is that availability of vaccines is much less of an issue. What is a problem is the delivery of vaccines, in other words, from veil to shot in the arm, as well as vaccine hesitancy, misinformation, pushing people away from what is in their best interest.
Right.
We also learned that vaccines on their own, they are not enough. What we need is testing, we need surveillance so we know what is happening where, we need the protocols, masking, distancing, and what we are advocating also is more attention to treatment, which has come up significantly. So a holistic approach to the whole set of COVID-19 protection measures is what we are advocating for.
One final question, ma'am. The situation in Sri Lanka. Sri Lanka is in debt. It's a real crisis at so many levels. What can be done to assist the Sri Lankan economy, and given the fact that they are in debt, they're unable to make their international payments, what is your prognosis?
I feel for the people in Sri Lanka. It is breaking my heart to watch the pictures of what is happening in a country that once was quite prosperous. It is a result of mismanagement, and therefore the most important thing to be done is to put the country back on a sound macroeconomic footing. And there has to be debt restructuring for Sri Lanka, which we will strongly support. We have a technical team in the country. We are ready to support Sri Lanka once we have clarity of what the program may look like and how that can be restructured. And I want to express my gratitude to India for being such a good friend of Sri Lanka and for advocating for support for Sri Lanka in this very difficult time.
Thank you. Well, wonderful talking to you, ma'am. Thank you so much for doing that. Very strong words there from the MD of the International Monetary Fund on the importance of countries no longer restricting the export of food at a time when there is a global crisis. India still has an important role to play. She reaches out also to people in Sri Lanka, the IMF acutely aware of the situation in that country.